Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into what sounds like a real-life spy thriller, the story of how Israel might have pulled off one of the biggest heists in history, stealing the raw materials for an atomic bomb right from under the nose of the United States. What we're going to unpack today is seriously one of the most audacious stories of the nuclear age. You've got espionage, high-stakes deception. This stuff is pulled straight from the book Stealing the Atom Bomb and actual declassified government files. So where does a story like this even start? And that question, that's what kicks off this whole mystery. We're talking about a puzzle that would take decades to even begin to piece together, and it goes all the way to the top, the highest levels of the U.S. government. All right, so let's start at the beginning. The year is 1968, and a pretty troubling report lands on the desk of the President of the United States. Now, the news itself that Israel had the bomb was a huge world-changing event. But you know what? What happened next was in some ways even more shocking. It was all about the president's reaction. So instead of blowing the whistle and launching a massive investigation, what does President Johnson do? He orders a cover-up. He tells his CIA director to keep it quiet. This basically forced any investigation to go completely underground, into the shadows. So the big question became, where do you even start looking? Well, it turns out the CIA already had a really critical piece of the puzzle, a physical clue that was found in, of all places, the Israeli desert. We're talking about highly enriched uranium, or HEU. This stuff is the absolute key ingredient for a certain type of atomic bomb. And guess what? Chemical tests near Israel's Dimona nuclear reactor found traces of it. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just any old uranium. It had a unique chemical signature. It was like a fingerprint. And that fingerprint allowed investigators to trace it all the way back to where it came from. And you won't believe where that trail led. It started at a U.S. government plant in Ohio, went through a private facility in Pennsylvania, and ended up in Israel. The path was crystal clear. All signs were suddenly pointing to one specific American company as the source. So, the investigation now had a prime suspect, a small company in Apollo, Pennsylvania. It was called NUMEC. Now, NUMEC's job was to process weapons-grade uranium for the U.S. government. But when auditors from the Atomic Energy Commission took a look at their books, they found some staggering discrepancies. We're talking 337 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium just gone, unaccounted for. To put that in perspective for you, that is enough material to build dozens of nuclear weapons. But what's really wild is when you see how NUMEC's losses compare to other similar plants. Yeah, NUMEC was a huge outlier. Their losses were more than double what you'd see at other plants. This wasn't just some sloppy accounting or normal waste. Something was very, very wrong. So, naturally, suspicion started to fall on the people who were running the place. And it turns out the company's founder, Dr. Zalman Shapiro, and other key people there had some pretty deep, well-documented ties to Israel. We're talking about investors who were leaders in the Zionist Organization of America, and Shapiro himself was even on the board of a group that honors Israeli spies. So the connections were, let's just say, they were there. Okay, so at this point, the circumstantial evidence is just piling up, right? And it's starting to look less like a simple case of missing material and more like a really sophisticated international operation. Just look at the timeline in the fall of '68. You've got high-level Israeli intelligence agents visiting the plant. Then a massive amount of uranium oxide gets diverted in Europe in a covert mission. And right after that, NUMEC's founder, Zalman Shapiro, heads off to Israel. The timing is just too perfect to be a coincidence. But the real smoking gun? It came from an eyewitness. Right, so a former employee told the FBI that one night, he saw the founder, Zalman Shapiro, pacing around the loading dock while these weird stovepipe containers were being loaded onto a truck. And he saw the shipping destination, Israel. Later on, he was actually threatened and told to keep his mouth shut. Doesn't get much more suspicious than that. So you might be wondering, with all this evidence, why wasn't there a big prosecution? Why didn't this blow up into a huge scandal? Well, the answer is complicated. It's a story of bureaucratic infighting and, frankly, a total lack of political will to see it through. You had this complete gridlock. The CIA was basically convinced it happened. They said a diversion to Israel was a distinct possibility. But the FBI, they just couldn't build a criminal case. J. Edgar Hoover himself said it was unlikely they'd find stronger facts.
And they were getting stonewalled by other agencies. So eventually they just dropped.
And this happened again and again. Multiple official inquiries were launched over the decades through different presidencies, but every single one just fizzled out. They'd run into political pressure or agencies wouldn't share information. The cover-up, for all intents and purposes, actually worked. But it came with a huge long-term cost. Think about it. By deliberately looking the other way while a friendly nation pulled off a nuclear heist, the U.S. kind of lost its moral high ground. How can you tell other countries not to build nuclear weapons when this isn't your own backstory? It's a compromise position, and that's a consequence that we're still dealing with today. So what was it in the end? An unbelievably audacious heist? Or just a colossal, embarrassing failure of oversight? The official files might be closed, but the questions, they definitely linger. And it makes you wonder, what are the real consequences when a nation decides to just look the other way? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.